Now we want to take a look at the slash post, the route with the params, and also the search params in this case. So we have the post one, which upon clicking on that, it will return to you this schema, and we have the comments of post one, and then this is the return data. We want to translate have add this to our schemas, so you can dynamically pass in data or whatever to the params, and then the code gen will generate the correct code to handle cases like this based on the inputs that you've provided. So let us um, write a schema for the first one, which is the post with the parameter. So it's going to follow the same format. You have the get, let's call it, we already have post here, so we can just make this post. So it's going to follow the same format. We have the post, and we are going to say post, and let's put slash one over there, and it's going to return a single post over here, which we already have the schema for that, which is over here. We have the single post. So there is no need for us to do anything else. So we just do post. We have that. Now, the interesting part is we actually don't want to just send in one, because if we have one here, the code gen will generate the code, will generate the hook with the param set to one always. But we want to change that. We want to make it dynamic, based that when you send in a particular value or something, the code is able to pass that input value and transform that, and add that to the URL. So let's say, for example, we want to, let's say, have maybe post slash something. I don't know, maybe we can make this a square bracket or something and say ID. And then the input that we are providing to it will be an object, and we say ID, and the ID is, let's say, one. So having this to, let's have this equation. So we have our URL here, the kind of like a template of the URL path plus the input object. It should provide us with post slash one. Oh, sorry, one. So this is the behavior that we are looking for, instead of just having a single one. So what we are going to do here is, let's give it some generic or some unique identifier for the codegen to know that this particular, or for our code to know that this particular segment of the URL is dynamic. It can change. So I'm just going to use some curly brackets here, and I'm going to, let's say, call this ID. So this curly bracket is going to be a unique identifier, which is going to be replaced by the data that we are going to pass in. And as we already see from the previous the previous video that we looked at the code, how to pass in inputs to a URL, pass in the inputs, the same thing that we're going to do here. So we have the URL over here, and we need what the input of to this particular request. So we're going to follow the exact same format. It's going to bring in the comma, and then we are going to provide the input. Let's say so with this format, we've already established everything, that this will be the schema, the input schema. So it's going to be transformed that will be transformed into TypeScript for us, and then this will be transformed into our hook, where is inside the hook is going to get this ID that we have here, and then place that over in the URL before sending that request off to the server somewhere. So how do we achieve that? We already have everything. Everything. You just need some few changes. Few changes needs to be done within the get formatted get request method. We need to change, do a little bit of update to this particular um, template or the code gen here, so that it can cater for cases where we have an input. So how do we do that? We already know that this name that we have here is going to, from the previous video, is going to house this whole piece of code right here, because it's going to break the text based on the spaces. So it's going to have this whole piece right here. That will be the name. And then rest, being an array, is going to have this will be the first index and this will be the second one. Whilst the previous one, it would have only been this response right here. Make the changes right here with the rest. So we need to change the response over here. So let us change the response here. Instead of it getting only this, translating this to TypeScript, we want to get both the input type as well as the response type. Okay, so let me explain a little bit what is going on with this particular part right here. So here we are saying that for the input type, if there's input, that means that if there's this and there's a response, that means we've broken down rest into two pieces. We have input or response. That means it could be this, or it could be just this object, this piece of just the response over here. And we have the second part, which is going to be response, which is this, or which is just this post, or nothing. So response over here potentially is let me just break this down. That is, it can be a string or nothing or undefined. The reason why it's undefined, because we've broken this rest as rest is split by spaces and it has only two pieces. We can have this single post input and post over here, or it can just have this. There is no secondary part of it, especially for the first part. For the first get request over here, there is no this the second what was it called, the array at index, the second index or something like that, because there's nothing there. There's completely nothing here. So there's nothing here, so it's going to be undefined. So we're going to use that as our check to verify if we actually have an input and a response, or we only have a response. And that is the case that we have over here. So to get an input type, what we are going to say is if there's input as well as the response, then we definitely know that there is an input type. That's what this piece of check is doing. And we sanitize the input or response. That means it's this particular piece of code right here. So this is what will be returned to us, which will be the single post input. We will sanitize that. That means we're just going to remove the brackets and the colon over there, because we already have the sanitize function for us already doing that. And we are only going to get this the input type. And for the response type, what we are saying is this: if there is response, if there is response, that means this second part is not undefined, then we are going to use that. But if there's nothing there, if there's undefined, because we are using this question mark, is going to return this the default value that we're going to pass after it, so which is called a knowledge correlation or something like that. So if this response over here is null or undefined, then this is what we want. That means that because there's nothing else after this particular because there is no input as in the case of this particular request, then we want this particular input or response, which is going to be the only value in there. Okay, so in essence, input or response is always going to have a value, whilst response over here is not always going to have a value. That's basically the check over there, and we get our the get value type. That means pass that into whatever type that is supposed to be. Okay, so now we do have our input type. We can update the code to include the input if it's available as in this particular request, or if it is not available as we have of it over here. But first I want to make some little bit of change, so let's do that. First we need the query key. We can get the query key by using the request name. So I made some changes here to include the query key, to have a constant value which has a query. Let's also export this. The reason why I have this, so this one will essentially return something. Let's say, so if we do have a request name as in users, it's going to be users query key. The reason for that is with this, you can use it within React query to invalidate the request. You can just use this key to invalidate the request, and also use that to access the data within the cache. So that's the reason for that. Now, the next thing that we want to do is to bring in this input type. And for the input is actually going to be over here. So what we're saying is this. So if there is an input type, so if input type does exist, then what we want is to have args in which its type is going to be input type right here. Other than that, nothing is going to be placed inside the inside the parameters. So we essentially kind of creating what variables. All right. Then we also need to pass in this exact same variables if there's any into this particular query keyword right here. The reason why we need to also include the input inside the query key is in cases where there is a change in the input. Let's say, for example, you are filtering or you are searching the data using the search input, and the user has typed in something. You want to make another request with that search value to the server. And React query, if that is not included inside this query key, React query won't know that there has been a change. Therefore, we need that the query key, the input to tell React query that there's some change, kind of like works like the dependency array in React. So there's some change. Therefore, make this request. You can make this data request again for us. That is the reason why we need the input. So if there is an input, then all we need to do is pass in the args. Right? This whole piece of code will be, let's say, so the query key will be, so if there is an input, let's say, so we have our URL. So let's say in this particular case right here, to be post query key, and because there is an input of single post, is going to generate single post input right here. Oh, sorry, args. Right, args over here. The args will be passed into this query key right here because of this input check that we have over here. So that'll be our arguments for it. Good. The next thing that we want to do is to before the request is made with a fetch, before the request is made, we want to change the data and we want to change the URL params based on the what the user has specified within this particular uh, let's call it your route or something like that. I've written a couple of functions that can help us. This function here is called insert data to path, which is simply going to take in your URL and the data, and then it's going to insert the key that you have inside the or inside your route. Is going to insert that corresponding data in there. So let's say, for example, if you have already have something like example here. So if you have slash post slash the object right here, post ID, what it's going to do is that it's going to generate this post over here. Let me make it a little bit bigger. So we have slash post slash, and then it's going to pick this post ID from this object because it exists over there. So because of this post ID reference we have in this object, is going to take its value and then place that in there. Now, if there's any extra data, it's going to convert all that extra data into a search parameter, and that's what we have over here. So ID will be changed. The remaining data will be changed into a search parameter. So it's kind of removing any data that is required inside the route itself, and then any extra thing is just going to be sent in as a search parameter. So that's basically what the insert data to path is doing. I'll put the code in the video description so you guys can check it out. All right. So we're going to import this insert data to path. So first we need to import that. And over here in our piece of code, we need to get that. So if there's an input type, so if there is an input, we are going to pass in the args. Other than that, we're just going to pass in an empty object. Right. We grab that and paste that inside our fetch URL, and that should do it. Let's generate the code for this. And as you can see, we have our generated code right here. So you see we have the post query key. So this is our post query key, which has the full URL path. And we have why did they use post? Yeah, sorry, forgot it's called use post. All right, so we have use post where it has the single input over here. So you translated that into our single input. And in our query key, we have the post query key and then its argument. And then inside the function, we translate, we get the URL. So with the arguments that it has, and we pass that URL to the fetch. So it's going to make the fetch, and then the response is going to be our promise of response. Now, if there is no input to the get request, as in we have for the users, this is how it behaves. So there will be no arguments in there, which is all right, which is what we need. There will be no argument passed to the query key, and inside the insert data to path, we're just going to pass in an empty object, and then it's going to get our full URL. So with this, we can even add any extra parameter. So let's say we have body something, right? So we have a body, and we can say it's a string. If we generate the code again right here, we regenerate the code again, you can see that nothing really changes for the post query key, nothing really changes. But when the request is made, it's going to include this body as a search parameter over there. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to look in adding the dynamic um, URL params or something that I don't know. We can give it a name or something to the put request. Because we know that post most of the times you don't add it, but in the put request you can add a dynamic URL. And what will happen in that instance where this time we are passing in the dynamic URL or segment of the URL with data alongside of it? Should that data be attached as the search parameters, or that should be sent off as the actual body of the request to the server? So we're going to look at that in the next video. Thanks very much.